Welcome! Today we're going to talk about what the individual letters of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator mean. And this video is really important because a lot of these words that we use in Myers-Briggs don't necessarily mean the same thing that they mean in our regular language in this context. So watching this video is going to bring you a whole bunch of clarity. Okay, before we get specifically into what each of the letters mean, let me share with you just a little bit of background about Myers-Briggs. I think it's really important for people to understand that Myers-Briggs is not a person, it's not an IQ test, it's not a destiny, it's a beginning of a conversation. So it's meant to open up a conversation, open up opportunities for you to know yourself better rather than shut you down or pigeonhole you or put you into a box. So another really important thing to know about Myers-Briggs is that the way they use the words are not necessarily the way that we use them in real life. So let's go ahead and dive right into what the specific letters of Myers-Briggs mean. So the first pair of preferences, the first letters are E and I. E stands for extroversion and I stands for introversion. Now, normally we call extroversion and introversion, we spell them with an O, E-X-T-R-O-verted, extroverted or extroversion, and introversion, I-N-T-R-O. But in Myers-Briggs, Carl Jung used E-X-T-R-A. And the reason that he did this was to make sure that we didn't confuse these words to mean the same thing that we use them in our everyday vernacular. So in Myers-Briggs' world, or in Carl Jung's world, extroversion and introversion are two opposite preferences for how we or where we get our energy from. So extroverted people tend to source their energy from the world around them, or I should say us, because I'm an extroverted type. And so that means that when I'm in social situations, when I'm out and about, when I'm with people, when I'm in the world, I draw energy from that. Now, there are other people that are more introverted. Those people generally draw their energy from the internal world of perceptions and ideas. So if there's a lot going on in the environment, there's a big party, that can be very draining for an introvert. Whereas for an extrovert or someone who has an extroverted preference, being solo by themselves for too long can be very draining. So think about if you're trying to understand whether you're extroverted or introverted, or your Myers-Briggs test didn't give you a clear answer, then consider, do you generally draw energy from being out in the world of people and places? And does that make you feel more energized? Or do you feel more energized when you're able to spend time by yourself, looking inward, being more introspective? So that's the extroversion-introversion dichotomy or pair of preferences. The second pair of preferences, the second set of letters, is N versus S. So N actually stands for intuition. Since I was already taken by introversion, they use N instead to denote intuition. There's intuition and sensing, NS. Intuition are people who prefer to think about and gather data about the world around us, gather information from ideas, possibilities, theory, more abstract thinking, versus the S type, which means sensing, who generally take in information or prefer to take in information from the world in a very concrete way through our five senses. So a sensing type generally sees the world in terms of the visual, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the feeling of things in a more concrete way, whereas the N type, the intuition, the person who has a preference for N, tends to see the world in terms of relationships and patterns between things and abstract connections. So I like to use the example here of the distinction. I always use in my workshops, I put a cup on the table, like a styrofoam cup or a ceramic cup, whatever kind of cup, and ask people to describe the cup. And what I find is that the N types very quickly start describing the cup in terms of its functionality, what it can do, what you can do with it, or maybe even associating it with a possibility or an idea of, for example, oh, my mother used to have a cup like this, and we would take it with us every time we went out in the morning, and she would drink her coffee, and it reminds me of this other thing. So in terms of the connections between things, versus the S type generally describes the cup in terms of how it looks, how it feels, the texture of it, the colors on it, very much in a concrete sensing type of way. So I've found in my experience of using Myers-Briggs with teams and with individuals that people generally, this is the biggest gap to bridge, I should say, which is that it's more challenging for N's and S's to communicate with each other because they see the world in such a different way. And it's very fun to watch N's get together and discuss things and play off of each other. And it's very fun to watch S's get together and really get each other in terms of how they see the world. So I find this dichotomy, this pair of preferences, for me, is one of the most interesting to explore and to observe. The third pair of preferences is the TF, thinking, feeling. Now again, remember, these words don't necessarily mean the same thing that we use them to mean in our everyday language. So in the world of Myers-Briggs, thinking and feeling are two different ways of making decisions. So this third pair of preferences is all about how we make decisions about the world around us. Now, do we prefer to make decisions from a thinking place, which is rational, logical, black and white? Or do we prefer to make decisions about the world from a feeling place based on values and ideal outcomes for people? So there's a distinction there. And let me just back up a second. I should have said this at the beginning. None of these is better or worse than another. These are all considered neutral. And so whatever your preference is, it's awesome. And whatever someone else's preference is, it's awesome. And we want to be careful about making value judgments between one or another. So people who generally make decisions on thinking are more black and white, more rational. There are fewer exceptions to the rule. When it's a thinking person, it's like, well, this is the rule, and this is the rule we're going to apply no matter what. With a feeling person, it's like, well, what are the circumstances in the situation? How does it make sense to apply the rule here? So this is about how we like to make decisions about things. The second preference, the second pair of preferences, remember, we talked about intuition and sensing, is really about how we like to gather data about the world. This third one is about how we, once we have the data, how do we decide? The fourth pair of preferences is actually one that Carl Jung never talked about in the first place. He didn't come up with this. This was added later by Myers and Briggs, who developed the MBTI inventory. So the J and P dichotomy, judging, perceiving, in this one, it's really important to remember that the word judging doesn't mean judgmental or judgment. Judging simply means, this last dichotomy, this last preference pair, is really about which function we prefer more. Do we prefer that second function, the information gathering function, or do we prefer that third function, the deciding function? So there are some of us in the world, me included, who prefer the information gathering function. And for that reason, we love to be in information gathering mode. We love to continue to explore the world. We love to keep getting more information. And we sometimes don't love as much to make decisions or stick to those decisions. That's the P. The P is perceiving. And those are people who have a preference for continuing to perceive the world around them. The J stands for judging, and the people who have a preference for judging generally prefer to make the decision and move on to the next one. They don't want to stay in information gathering mode for too long. They want to make a decision and move on. And so the judging types generally are people who, for example, like to check things off of lists, whereas the perceiving types are generally people who like to make more and more lists. And I'm laughing because this describes me perfectly, and you probably know right away if this resonates with you. So now we're gonna get a little deeper, okay, if you want to. You could just stay right here and you'd have a pretty good understanding of Myers-Briggs. But if you really want to understand Myers-Briggs, and we'll go into this in a future video, you really need to understand the interplay among these four pairs of preferences. It's not just like, okay, I have this preference, this preference, this preference, this preference. I'm an ENFP, which is actually my type. There's also how the preferences play together and influence each other, and that's called type dynamics. Type dynamics can get really complicated, and I'm going to make it really simple right now. It simply means that an ENFP is not the same as an INFP, but with the I, with everything turned inward. No. Whether you're an E or an I influences how the other preferences express. Same with the J and P. Whether you're a J or a P influences how the other pieces express. So for example, the fact that I'm an ENFP and I have a preference for this perceiving function, that means that I lead with my second function, which in my case is intuition. That means that I extrovert and I express my intuition, what I'm doing right here, right now, which is I love to talk about and share and express out into the world in an extroverted way my ideas and patterns that I've recognized and thoughts and abstract theories and all these things that I've been sharing, for example, on this video. So that's where Myers-Briggs gets really fun, for me anyways, and it would take, a few days to actually go deep into this content. So I hope that was helpful for you, and if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments below. I would be excited to answer any questions you might have and even record future videos to answer your questions. So make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you can get notifications when I upload a new video. Have a great day.